Imagine walking into a classroom every day where every word used against you is disguised as tradition, where silence is your only armor and the fear of being seen blends with the deep desire to finally be visible. Lucas Reed didn't want attention. He just wanted to survive. But when the words of a classic novel collided with his own truth, what should have been just another lesson turned into a battlefield. And who would have thought his salvation wouldn't come from courage, but from the roar of an Italian engine in the school parking lot? Who are we when we're forced to hide? What happens when someone finally decides to see you for who you truly are? And how far will authority go to protect its illusion of control? The school, the teacher, the students, they all thought they knew who Lucas was, until the past, the present, and a Ferrari parked outside shattered the lie that some stories can't be questioned, especially the ones used to erase you. If this story has sparked your curiosity, watch the full video now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the powerful stories we have coming next. And tell me in the comments, which city and country are you watching from? It means a lot to me to know where my fans are tuning in from. I love seeing how far these stories are reaching. In the hallways of Westfield High School, Lucas Reed walked with his shoulders slightly hunched, almost as if trying to fold his lanky 17-year-old frame into something smaller, less noticeable. His dark, curly hair fell over one eye. Not a fashion statement, but a shield. Today, like most days, he wore a simple blue hoodie over jeans that had seen better days. Nothing about him demanded attention, and that's exactly how he preferred it. Lucas wasn't the type of student who raised his hand in class, not because he didn't know the answers, he usually did, but because Ms. Patricia Harmon's AP Literature class had become a minefield he navigated daily with increasing dread. As he slid into his desk in the back corner of the classroom, he noticed Tyler Jenkins and his crew watching him smirking. Lucas pulled out his worn copy of The Great Gatsby, focusing on the dog-eared pages rather than the whispers that followed him everywhere. "Good morning, class," Ms. Harmon announced, her voice carrying that particular crispness that seemed designed to make students sit straighter. At 52, she wore her blonde hair in a tight bun that pulled her features into permanent judgment. Her pearl necklace and tailored blazers were as much a part of her identity as her notorious views on traditional values. Today, we'll be discussing Fitzgerald's portrayal of American wealth and the corruption of the American dream. She began pacing between the rows. But first, I'd like to hear your interpretations of the symbolism in Chapter 7. Several hands shot up. Ms. Harmon pointed to Alyssa Chen in the front row. "I think the weather symbolizes the emotional tension building between the characters," Alyssa offered. "It's hot and uncomfortable, just like their relationships." "Good observation," Ms. Harmon nodded approvingly. Lucas, feeling a rare moment of academic courage, slowly raised his hand. Literature was the one subject where he truly excelled, the one place where words gave him power he lacked elsewhere. Ms. Harmon's eyes narrowed slightly as she noticed him. "Yes, Mr. Reed. I think there's also something interesting about how Gatsby's identity is being stripped away in this chapter." Lucas said, his voice softer than he intended. "The way his carefully constructed persona starts to fall apart when confronted with Tom. It's like watching someone's authentic self being exposed against their will." The room fell unusually quiet. Lucas had spoken more in that moment than he had all semester. Ms. Harmon's lips thinned. "Interesting that you'd focus on authentic selves, Mr. Reed. Though I wonder if you're projecting your own situation onto Fitzgerald's work." Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tyler snickered. "I'm just analyzing the text," Lucas replied, his face flushing. "Are you?" Ms. Harmon approached his desk. "Because it seems to me you're trying to force a modern alternative lifestyle reading onto a classic American novel about traditional values." Lucas felt his throat tighten. "I didn't say anything about, we all know about your preferences. Mr. Reed." Ms. Harmon's voice carried a sharp edge that silenced the room. "But in my classroom, we analyze literature through its intended lens, not through the distorted perspective of contemporary social experiments." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "Miss Harmon," he began, voice trembling slightly, "that's not what I—" "You know," she cut him off, addressing the class now, "this is exactly what's happening to education today. Classical literature being hijacked to promote agendas that undermine traditional family structures." She turned back to Lucas. "Gatsby wasn't struggling with his identity, Mr. Reed. He was a man pursuing a woman as nature intended." A few students laughed. Others looked at their desks, embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. "That's not what I meant," Lucas said, barely audible now. "Speak up if you're going to challenge me," Ms. Harmon demanded. Lucas felt 25 pairs of eyes on him. The room seemed to shrink. "I wasn't making it about sexuality," he said louder now. "I was talking about social class and reinvention." "Right." Ms. Harmon smiled coldly. "Just like how you reinvented yourself last year. We all remember who you were before your little announcement." Tyler's laugh was the loudest, but not the only one. Even Alyssa, who was normally kind, covered a smile. "That's not fair," Lucas managed, his voice cracking. "Life isn't fair, Mr. Reed. The sooner you accept natural order instead of fighting it, the happier you'll be." Ms. Harmon turned away. "Now, who else has an appropriate analysis to offer Madison?" As Madison began speaking about color symbolism, Lucas sat, frozen humiliation burning through him like acid. He'd been outed last year, after someone found messages on his phone. He hadn't even told his father yet. The class continued, but Lucas heard nothing. He stared at the same page in his book, vision blurred, until the merciful sound of the bell finally released him. As students filed out, Tyler bumped Lucas's shoulder hard. "Hey, Ferry, maybe you should analyze something you understand, like how to be less of a freak." "Leave me alone," Lucas muttered, shoving his book into his backpack. "Mr. Jenkins, Mr. Reed, no." "Pushing in my classroom," Ms. Harmon called out, somehow only witnessing Lucas's defensive move. "Sorry, Ms. Harmon," Tyler replied with practiced sincerity. "Just trying to give him some space. You know how these guys get around real men." Ms. Harmon merely raised an eyebrow. "Just move along." Lucas rushed out, head down, making it halfway down the hall before feeling a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, turning to find Zoe Ramirez, one of the few students who still spoke to him. "That was really messed up," she said, her dark eyes concerned beneath a fringe of purple-streaked black hair. "You should report her." Lucas laughed bitterly. To who? Principal Weber, the man who keeps a Bible on his desk and quotes scripture at school assemblies. "It's still discrimination," Zoe insisted. "What she did was wrong." "It doesn't matter," Lucas said, the fight draining out of him. "I've got bigger problems anyway." "Like what?" Lucas hesitated. "My dad's coming home tomorrow." "I thought that was good news. Doesn't he travel all the time for work?" "Yeah," Lucas nodded. "And I prefer it that way." He didn't elaborate that his father's extended business trips were the only thing that had kept him from having to come out at home. That fragile protection was about to disappear. That evening, Lucas sat at his kitchen table attempting to focus on homework. The house felt too big, too empty. A sprawling colonial in one of the nicer neighborhoods outside town that somehow never quite felt like home. His mother had left when he was 8, deciding family life wasn't for her. Now it was just him and his father's ships passing in the night. His phone buzzed with a text from his dad. "Flight lands at 9 p.m. We'll be home by 11. Don't wait up. Big news to share tomorrow." Lucas texted back a simple, "Okay," and set his phone down. Whatever the news was, it could wait. He had more immediate concerns, like how to survive another day in Ms. Harmon's class. He hadn't told his father about any of the bullying. Richard Reed was rarely home, and when he was, conversations stayed safely in the territory of grades and practical matters. His father wasn't cold exactly, just distant, as if parenthood was another business project he managed from afar. Lucas, he knew his father loved him in his way. He just wasn't sure that love would survive knowing who his son really was. Morning came too quickly. Lucas woke to the unfamiliar sound of movement downstairs. his father making coffee in the kitchen. He dressed carefully, choosing the least conspicuous clothes he owned. Sometimes he wondered if his entire life had become an exercise in not being noticed. Downstairs, Richard Reed stood by the kitchen island, scrolling through emails on his phone. At 45, he remained fit and sharp, his salt and pepper hair precisely cut his casual sweater and slacks, somehow looking as formal as the suits he typically wore. "Morning," Lucas offered. Richard looked up, a rare smile softening his features. "There he is. How's school?" "Fine," Lucas answered automatically. "How was Shanghai productive?" Richard set his phone down. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've made a decision that's going to affect both of us." Lucas tensed. Had someone told him? Was this about to be the conversation he'd been dreading? "I'm taking a position here," Richard continued. "No more traveling. I'll be based locally from now on." Lucas blinked, processing. "You're staying?" "Yes. I've realized I've been absent too long. You're almost finished with high school, and I've missed too much already." He paused. "I'm sorry for that, Lucas." "It's okay," Lucas said automatically, though his mind was racing. His father staying meant no more safe distance, no more carefully managed interactions. It meant eventually facing the truth. "It's not okay," Richard said firmly. "But I'm going to do better. Starting today, actually. I'm coming to your school this afternoon." Lucas nearly choked on his orange juice. "What? Why?" "Parent-teacher conferences." "Those aren't mandatory," Lucas said quickly. "And they're usually during the day." "I requested a special appointment. I want to meet your teachers, see how you're doing." Richard checked his watch. "I have meetings until 200, but I'll be there around 2:30. "Dad, you really don't need to." "I want to, Lucas. I've been an absentee father for too long." His expression softened. "I know things haven't been easy since your mother left. I threw myself into work instead of being there for you. I want to change that." Lucas felt a conflicting mess of emotions: appreciation for his father's effort, terror at what might happen at school, and the constant grinding anxiety of his unspoken truth. "Okay," he finally managed. "Thanks. I'll see you this afternoon then." Richard squeezed his son's shoulder awkwardly before grabbing his keys. "Oh, and I almost forgot. I got a new car while I was away. The company shipped it over from Italy yesterday." "What happened to the Audi?" Richard smiled. "I decided I deserved something a little more exciting. You'll see it later." After his father left, Lucas stood frozen in the kitchen. A parent-teacher meeting with Ms. Harmon was quite possibly the worst scenario he could imagine. His carefully separated worlds were about to collide. Ms. Harmon's literature class was the last period of the day, and Lucas considered skipping it entirely. But that would only raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. So he slid into his seat, keeping his eyes down, praying to become truly invisible. "Today we'll continue our discussion of Gatsby," Ms. Harmon announced, specifically focusing on the theme of social aspiration and the dangers of reinvention. Lucas felt the pointed comment like a needle. He kept his hand down, his eyes on his book. "Mr. Reed," Miss Harmon called, though he hadn't volunteered. "Since you had so much to say about identity yesterday, perhaps you'd like to explain why Gatsby's reinvention ultimately leads to his downfall." All eyes turned to him. Lucas swallowed hard. Because society wouldn't accept him for who he really was," he answered quietly. "Wrong," Ms. Harmon replied sharply. "Gatsby's downfall comes from his refusal to accept natural social boundaries. He tried to become something he wasn't, and it destroyed him." She stepped closer to Lucas's desk. "Some things are fixed by nature and tradition, Mr. Reed. Pretending otherwise leads to tragedy." Tyler snickered, nudging the student beside him. "That's not what the book says," Lucas found himself saying, surprising even himself. Ms. Harmon's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me. Fitzgerald doesn't condemn Gatsby for reinventing himself." Lucas continued, his voice stronger now. "He condemns the society that wouldn't accept him despite his transformation. The tragedy isn't that Gatsby changed. It's that others couldn't see beyond what they decided he was. The classroom fell silent. Ms. Harmon's face hardened. You seem determined to distort classic literature to fit your personal agenda, Mr. Reed. Gatsby wasn't rejected because of who he was. He was rejected because he tried to deny natural order. There's nothing in the text about natural order, Lucas countered, his heart pounding. That's your interpretation, not Fitzgerald's. Ms. Harmon's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you suggesting I don't understand the material I've been teaching for 20 years? I'm suggesting literature can be interpreted in different ways, Lucas said, his voice shaking slightly. And using it to push your personal views on what's natural isn't teaching, it's preaching. The class collectively inhaled. No one challenged Ms. Harmon this way. That's enough, she snapped. See me after class, Mr. Reed. Oh, Tyler Mock whispered. Fairy's in trouble. Mr. Jenkins, that language is inappropriate, Ms. Harmon said, though her reprimand lacked conviction. Sorry, Ms. Harmon, Tyler replied, not looking sorry at all. Just stating facts. The remainder of the class passed in excruciating slowness. When the bell finally rang, Lucas remained seated as other students filed out, many glancing back curiously. Ms. Harmon closed the door. After the last student left, then turned to face Lucas, arms crossed. Your behavior today was completely unacceptable, she began. Challenging a teacher in front of the class undermines my authority and disrupts learning. You singled me out, Lucas replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. You've been doing it for months. I call on students who need correction, she said coldly. And frankly, Mr. Reed, your insistence on bringing your lifestyle choices into academic discussions is inappropriate. I never mentioned my lifestyle, Lucas said. You did. You're the one who keeps bringing it up. Ms. Harmon's face flushed with anger. You need to understand something. This school has standards. Traditional values matter here. Your choices are your business, but flaunting them in my classroom is unacceptable. I don't flaunt anything, Lucas said, anger finally overtaking fear. I exist, that's all. You're the one who can't see past who you think I am. That's enough. Ms. Harmon slammed her hand on the desk. I'm writing you up for insubordination. Principal Weber will decide if... A knock at the classroom door interrupted her. Both turned to see the school secretary peering in. Ms. Harmon, sorry to interrupt, but Lucas has a visitor waiting in the front office. A parent-teacher meeting. Lucas felt his stomach drop. His father was here. Ms. Harmon's expression shifted to a professional smile. Of course. Mr. Reed and I were just finishing our discussion. I'll be right there. As the secretary left, Ms. Harmon gathered her gradebook and planner. We'll continue this conversation with your father present. Perhaps he'll have some insight into your recent behavioral issues. Lucas followed her down the hallway, panic mounting with each step. The whispers started almost immediately as other students noticed him walking with Ms. Harmon toward the office, word spreading quickly through the afternoon crowd. When they reached the administrative area, Lucas saw several students and teachers gathered near the front windows looking out at the parking lot. What's going on? Ms. Harmon asked one of the office assistants. Oh, someone just pulled up in a Ferrari, the young woman answered. A black one. Everyone's trying to figure out who it is. Lucas felt a strange sensation wash over him. His father's words from that morning suddenly replayed in his mind. I got a new car while I was away. The company shipped it over from Italy yesterday. Through the window he could see the sleek black Ferrari parked in the visitor's spot, its distinctive, prancing horse emblem catching the afternoon sun, and stepping out of it, straightening his tailored suit jacket, was Richard Reed. Ms. Harmon moved toward the front entrance, clearly intending to greet the mysterious visitor, unaware that he was Lucas's father. Lucas followed his anxiety, now mixed with a strange new feeling he couldn't quite identify. The front doors opened, and Richard Reed entered Westfield High for the first time. The effect was immediate. Richard carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. His bespoke suit designer watch, and the simple fact of the Ferrari outside created an instant impression. Mr. Reed, Ms. Harmon stepped forward, extending her hand. Patricia Harmon, AP Literature. Thank you for making time to meet today. Richard shook her hand firmly. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. I've been overseas too long and wanted to check in on Lucas's progress. Ms. Harmon's expression flickered for just a moment as she processed the connection. You're Lucas's father? Yes, Richard confirmed, looking past her to Lucas. There he is. How was your day, son? Before Lucas could answer, Tyler Jenkins, who had been among those gawking at the Ferrari, approached his usual swagger, momentarily replaced by starstruck awe. Excuse me, sir, he said to Richard. Is that the 488 Pista, outside? Richard turned, assessing the teenager. No, it's the SF90 Straydale. Hybrid system, just under 1,000 horsepower. Tyler's eyes widened. That's insane, it must have cost. About $500,000, Richard said matter-of-factly. Are you a friend of Lucas's? The question hung in the air. Tyler's expression froze, caught between his car enthusiasm and the social implications of being associated with Lucas. We have class together, he managed. I see, Richard said, his tone cooling slightly. He turned back to Ms. Harmon. Shall we begin our meeting? I have several questions about the curriculum. Of course, Ms. Harmon replied, clearly recalibrating her approach. We can use the conference room. Lucas, you can wait here, or… I'd like Lucas to join us, Richard interrupted, smoothly. After all, this is about his education. As they walked toward the conference room, Lucas could feel the weight of stares following them. His classmates' expressions ranged from shock to confusion to sudden calculating interest. The power dynamic had shifted visibly, and no one quite knew what to make of it. Inside the small conference room, Ms. Harmon sat across from Richard and Lucas, arranging her materials with precise movements that betrayed her nervousness. Mr. Reed, I must say, it's unusual to meet a parent for the first time so late in the school year, she began. I'm aware my travel schedule has been problematic, Richard acknowledged. That's changing now. I'll be much more involved in Lucas's life going forward. Ms. Harmon nodded approvingly. That's excellent news. Boys need strong father figures, especially during these formative years when they're developing their identities. The emphasis on identities wasn't subtle. Lucas tensed. Speaking of which, Ms. Harmon continued, I was just discussing some concerns with Lucas before you arrived. He's been increasingly confrontational in class, challenging teaching methods and interpretations. Richard turned to his son with a raised eyebrow. Is that right? Lucas opened his mouth to defend himself, but Ms. Harmon continued. I believe there may be some outside influences affecting his perspective. He seems determined to reinterpret classic literature through rather modern lenses that distort the original meaning. Could you be more specific? Richard asked. Ms. Harmon hesitated slightly. Well, for instance, today, we were discussing how Gatsby's downfall in Fitzgerald's novel stems from his refusal to accept natural social boundaries. Lucas insisted on a different interpretation that frankly seems coloured by personal biases. And what biases would those be? Richard's tone remained pleasant, but Lucas recognised the sharpening edge in his father's voice. Ms. Harmon shifted in her seat. Mr. Reed, I believe in being direct. Are you aware of certain choices Lucas has been making regarding his lifestyle? The room fell silent. Lucas stared at the table, unable to look at his father, certain this was the moment everything would fall apart. Ms. Harmon, Richard said finally, his voice dangerously calm. Are you referring to my son's sexual orientation? The bluntness of the question seemed to startle her. Yes, I believe it's affecting his academic perspective and causing disruption. I see. Richard leaned forward slightly. And you believe his lifestyle, as you call it, is a choice? Well, many respected authorities would say. I didn't ask about authorities, Richard interrupted. I asked what you believe. Miss Harmon straightened. I believe in traditional values. Mr. Reed, this school has always stood for certain principles, and while we respect all students, we also maintain standards of conduct and thought that have served generations well. Fascinating, Richard said. So when my son offers a literary interpretation that doesn't align with yours, you attribute it to his sexuality rather than his intelligence. That's not what I... Because that sounds remarkably like discrimination to me, Richard continued, his voice still conversational, but with an unmistakable edge. And discrimination based on sexual orientation is prohibited under both federal education law and this state's human rights statutes. If you're finding this story compelling, please leave a like and subscribe. Your support motivates us to share more stories like this one. Ms. Harmon's face paled slightly. Mr. Reed, I think you're misunderstanding. I'm simply concerned about Lucas's combative attitude in class. Really, because I just heard you explicitly connect his academic contributions to his sexual orientation. Richard opened his leather portfolio and jotted something down. Tell me, is it your practice to mention students' sexuality during parent conferences, or is my son receiving special treatment? Lucas watched in stunned silence as his father, the man he'd feared would reject him, systematically dismantled Ms. Harmon's position. Mr. Reed, Ms. Harmon attempted to regain control. I think we're getting off track. The issue is Lucas's behavior, not his. Actually, Richard interrupted again, I'd like to know more about this literary discussion. Lucas, what was your interpretation of Gatsby that Ms. Harmon found so objectionable? Put on the spot, Lucas swallowed hard before answering. I said that Fitzgerald wasn't condemning Gatsby for changing himself, but rather showing how society refused to see beyond what they'd decided he was, that the tragedy wasn't his reinvention, but others' rejection of it. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like a valid literary interpretation to me. What specifically did you object to Ms. Harmon? It contradicts the traditional reading of the text, she replied stiffly. And there can only be one correct interpretation of literature, Richard asked. Of course not, but then I'm still unclear on the problem. Richard closed his portfolio. Unless, of course, the issue isn't Lucas's interpretation at all, but rather your discomfort with who he is. Ms. Harmon's face flushed. Mr. Reed, I've been teaching for 20 years. I've never been accused of what bias discrimination? Richard's voice remained calm. Yet you opened this meeting by connecting my son's sexuality to his academic performance. You used phrases like natural order and traditional values as justification for dismissing his contributions. I was simply creating a hostile, educational environment, Richard finished for her. Ms. Harmon, I run an international technology firm with over 5,000 employees. I deal with discrimination cases regularly. I know exactly what it looks like. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas stared at his father, seeing him in an entirely new light. Mr. Reed, Ms. Harmon finally said, her voice tight. I think we should continue this discussion with Principal Weber present. I think that's an excellent idea, Richard agreed, standing. I'd very much like to discuss the school's policies on inclusivity and whether they're being properly implemented. As they walked to Principal Weber's office, Lucas felt like he was in a dream. The hallways were mostly empty now, but the few remaining students watched with undisguised curiosity as they passed. Principal Weber, a broad-shouldered man with thinning hair and the demeanor of a former coach, greeted them with professional warmth that cooled slightly when Ms. Harmon requested an immediate meeting. Once seated in Weber's office, Ms. Harmon began. Principal Weber, Mr. Reed, has expressed some concerns about my teaching methods that I thought you should address. I see, Weber turned to Richard. What seems to be the issue, Mr. Reed? Discrimination, Richard replied simply. Ms. Harmon has been singling out my son because of his sexual orientation, using coded language about natural order and traditional values to dismiss his academic contributions and creating a hostile learning environment. Weber's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation. It is, Richard agreed, and one I'm prepared to pursue through every available channel, including the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, and if necessary, legal action. The principal's eyes widened slightly. I'm sure that won't be necessary. Westfield High takes all allegations of discrimination very seriously. I'm glad to hear it, Richard said, because I've just learned my son has been experiencing this treatment for months, along with harassment from other students that has gone unchecked. Lucas looked up in surprise. He hadn't told his father anything. Seeing his expression, Richard added, "Your English essays made it pretty clear, Lucas. You've been writing about isolation and judgment all year. I should have recognized it sooner." Principal Weber cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, I can assure you that if Lucas had reported any harassment, the responsibility to prevent harassment doesn't begin and end with student reporting." Richard interrupted. "It's the school's obligation to create a safe environment, period." Ms. Harmon, who had been silent, finally spoke. "This is absurd. I treat all students equally. If Lucas felt singled out, perhaps it's because he insists on bringing controversial perspectives into class discussions." "What controversial perspectives?" Richard asked. "Literary interpretations? Or are you referring to his existence as a gay student?" "I never said—" "You didn't have to," Richard cut her off. "Your language and behavior made your position clear, and I suspect this isn't isolated to my son." Principal Weber raised his hands placatingly. "Let's all take a step back. Mr. Reed, what outcome are you looking for here?" Richard considered the question. "First, I want a formal investigation into discriminatory practices in Ms. Harmon's classroom. Not just toward Lucas, but any LGBTQ or minority students." Ms. Harmon began to protest, but Weber silenced her with a look. "Second," Richard continued, "I want a comprehensive review of your anti-bullying and non-discrimination policies and evidence they're being enforced." "And third," Weber asked. "Third, I want my son transferred to a different literature class immediately. I won't have him subjected to this environment one day longer." Principal Weber nodded slowly. "Those are reasonable requests. We can arrange the class transfer today. As for the investigation and policy review, I'll need to consult with the superintendent." "Of course," Richard agreed. "I'd be happy to discuss it with her as well. We've met at several charity functions." The implication that Richard moved in the same social circles as the district's leadership wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "That won't be necessary," Weber assured him quickly. "We take these matters seriously." "Excellent," Richard stood. "Then I think we're done for today. Lucas, do you have everything you need? We can go." As they left the office, Ms. Harmon remained, behind with Principal Weber, their hushed, urgent conversation following Lucas and his father down the hall. They walked in silence through the now-empty corridors. A few teachers glanced up from their classrooms as they passed, curious about the man in the expensive suit accompanying Lucas Reed, of all people. When they reached the parking lot, the Ferrari sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, still drawing occasional admiring glances from students waiting for rides. "Dad," Lucas finally said as they approached the car, "how did you know about me, I mean?" Richard stopped, turning to face his son. "Lucas, I've known since you were 14. Lucas stared at him in shock. "But I never told you." "You didn't have to," Richard said gently. "I'm your father, and I'm not nearly as oblivious as I sometimes seem. But you never said anything. I was waiting for you to tell me when you were ready." Richard's expression softened with regret. "I thought I was giving you space and respect. Now I realize I was just failing you in a different way. I should have made it clear long ago that nothing about who you are could ever change how much I love you." Lucas felt tears threatening and looked away. "I thought you'd be disappointed. The only thing that disappoints me," Richard said firmly, "is that you've been going through this alone, because I was too absent to notice how bad things were." He placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "That changes now." They stood there for a moment, the years of distance between them not gone, but beginning to close. "So," Lucas finally said, nodding toward the Ferrari, "is this a midlife crisis or something?" Richard laughed, the tension breaking. "Maybe a little, but mostly it's because life's too short not to drive what makes you happy." He tossed the keys to Lucas, who caught them in surprise. "Want to learn how to drive a stick shift?" Lucas looked at the exotic car, then back at his father. "Are you serious?" Absolutely, Richard nodded. Though maybe we start in an empty parking lot, not the school grounds. As they got into the car, Lucas carefully sliding into the passenger seat, he noticed Tyler Jenkins and a few other students watching open-mouthed from near the bus loop. Richard noticed too. Friends of yours? Not exactly, Lucas admitted. Richard studied the group for a moment, then turned to his son. Want to really give them something to talk about? Before Lucas could answer, Richard revved the Ferrari's engine, the powerful sound echoing across the parking lot. Every head turned. Wave, Richard instructed with a grin. Feeling suddenly inexplicably bold, Lucas did. The looks on their faces, Tyler's in particular, was worth every moment of humiliation he'd endured. As they pulled away the Ferrari's engine, growling impressively, Lucas felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the simple joy of being seen, truly seen, and accepted. The next morning, Lucas approached Westfield High with different energy. He walked straighter, head up, no longer trying to disappear. The events of the previous day had spread through the school like wildfire, transforming him overnight from invisible target to subject of intense curiosity. He'd been transferred to Mr. Chen's literature class, a younger teacher known for his progressive approach and enthusiasm for diverse perspectives. His first class wouldn't be until after lunch, but the anticipation felt more like excitement than dread. As he reached his locker, Zoe appeared beside him. "So," she said, leaning against the adjacent locker. "A Ferrari? How you've been holding out on me?" Lucas shrugged, smiling slightly. "It's my dad's, not mine." "Still," she pressed, "you never mentioned your father was like mega rich." "It never came up," Lucas said simply. "And we're not mega rich, he just does well." Well enough to terrify. The administration, apparently. Zoe grinned. "The rumors are wild. Some people are saying Ms. Harmon got fired." "She didn't," Lucas corrected. "At least not yet. There's going to be an investigation." "About time," Zoe declared. "She's been awful to half the students here for years. No one ever stood up to her before." Lucas closed his locker. "Yeah, well, I didn't exactly plan it." "That makes it even better," Zoe insisted. "Oh, heads up. Tyler alert." Lucas turned to see Tyler approaching, flanked by two of his usual friends. Instead of their typical hostile expressions, they looked almost nervous. "Hey, Reed," Tyler said, stopping a few feet away. "That was some car yesterday." "Thanks," Lucas replied cautiously. An awkward silence followed. "So your dad owns some big tech company?" Tyler finally asked. "He's the CEO," Lucas corrected. "He doesn't own all of it." "Still pretty sick," Tyler said, clearly struggling with this new information that conflicted with his established view of Lucas. "Anyway, we're having a party Friday. You should come." His eyes flicked to Zoe. "Both of you." Lucas studied Tyler's face, recognizing the calculation behind the invitation. Yesterday, he was fairy. Today, he was worth knowing. The power shift was so transparent, it was almost comical. "Thanks," Lucas said, "but I've got plans with my dad Friday. He's taking me to look at colleges." Tyler nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. Cool, maybe next time." As Tyler and his friends walked away, Zoe nudged Lucas. "Did you just turn down the party everyone's been talking about?" "Yeah." Lucas smiled. "Feels pretty good, actually." "And are you really looking at colleges with your dad?" "No," Lucas admitted, "but we are having dinner. First time in years we've really talked. I don't want to miss it." Zoe's expression softened. "That's actually really sweet." As they walked to class, Lucas felt the stares and whispers following him. But for the first time, they didn't feel threatening. The same students who had laughed at his humiliation now looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. He knew it was superficial, based on his father's car and status, rather than who he truly was. But it still represented a fundamental shift. For years he'd been trying to make himself invisible, believing visibility meant vulnerability. Now he understood that visibility could also mean power. The real change, though, wasn't about his status at school. It was the weight that had lifted when he realized his father not only accepted him, but would stand up for him without hesitation. For the first time in years, Lucas felt like he could simply exist, not as someone hiding, not as someone performing, but as himself. At lunch, he sat with Zoe and her friends rather than alone. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter that felt genuine rather than forced. "So, what happens now with Miss Harmon?" someone asked. Lucas considered the question. "I don't know exactly. My dad said the school has to follow certain procedures, but he also said if they don't handle it properly, he knows people who will." "Your dad sounds kind of badass," Zoe commented. Lucas smiled, thinking about it. "Yeah, I guess he is." His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "How's the new class? Everything okay today?" The simple check-in meant more than his father could possibly know. Lucas typed back, "All good. Thanks for yesterday." The reply came seconds later. "Nothing to thank me for. It's what fathers are supposed to do." Lucas put his phone away, a strange feeling of contentment settling over him. The road ahead wouldn't be perfectly smooth. Ms. Harmon still had allies among the faculty, some students would still judge him, and years of instinct wouldn't disappear overnight. But something fundamental had changed. He was no longer invisible. If you believe in standing up for what's right, and that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, please share this story. Together, we can make a difference in creating a more accepting world.